I recently took a trip involving airplanes, a train, and automobiles. An examination of the fuel consumption for this trip I thought would be interesting. This analysis will look at each mode of travel, the number of miles traveled, and the gallons of fuel consumed. It's not going to really look into costs or types of fuel. I started my trip in Louisville, Kentucky at my residence, flew to Chicago, Illinois, transferred to the Amtrak station where I caught an Amtrak train from Chicago, Illinois to New Orleans, Louisiana. I had an overnight stay in New Orleans and did some sightseeing on foot, but essentially I traveled from the Amtrak station to the New Orleans airport. From New Orleans I flew to Atlanta and then connected with a flight to Louisville. At the Louisville airport I traveled by car to my residence. So let's look at the fuel consumption for this trip using three modes of transportation. First of all, what were the miles per gallon per passenger on each mode? Remember, I'm not differentiating between types of fuel, just gallons of fuel. My best research shows me that an Amtrak passenger train averages 56 miles per gallon per passenger. How does that compare to airplanes? Well, the average mile per gallon per passenger on a typical airplane is 50 miles per gallon. How do these two modes of travel compare to my own vehicle? I took my own vehicle on two small legs of the trip. It's a Kia Niro PHEV. And I had good data on that, 52 miles per gallon of fuel, one passenger of course. The final mode of travel was by taxi, and I used a taxi for two short legs of this journey. My initial plan was to use the L train in Chicago and a bus service in New Orleans, but I ended up using taxis for both of those legs. Let me zoom in here to get the miles per gallon per passenger for the two short taxi trips. The taxi trips were approximately the same distance. One was 15 miles, the other was 16 miles. Both were accomplished in a standard SUV, and I estimate the miles per gallon for each SUV to be 29 miles per gallon. The catch, though, is that one of the trips I was the lone passenger, and for the other trip I was one of three passengers. So that changes the miles per gallon per passenger average for the taxi trips, 57 miles per gallon per passenger. We cannot just average those numbers together to get the fuel consumption for the entire trip. We have to look at the distance traveled by each mode. The train trip was 927 miles from Chicago to New Orleans. I had three legs in the air, and they were, as shown here, 287, 424 miles, and 231 miles. Two short legs in my own vehicle, of both 21 miles, and two short legs by taxi, 15 and 16 miles. Knowing the miles per gallon per passenger and the total miles traveled by each mode, we can come up with some sort of pretty good estimation on the total fuel consumption by mode. 43% of the total fuel consumed on the trip was by Amtrak train, 53% by the various airplanes, 2% by my own vehicle, and another 2% by taxi. So here are some final conclusions about the trip. The total distance was 2,032 miles. Fuel consumption was 38.69 gallons of various types of fuel. The total time was 65 and a half hours. My average speed was 31 miles per hour, and my fuel mileage was 52.52 miles per gallon.